everybody! Oh, this has been a week of hell! Oh, and I don't say that lightly. I get more migraines now than I ever did when I was younger. Oh, but this last week was a killer. Oh, I had a migraine that lasted for 3 days. Literally. I could hardly think during that whole time, and even doing art, something that normally helps actually relax my brain at least a little bit, was only dulling it rather than giving me any sort of pain-free time. Ah, not fun at all. But thank you so much for not minding that I took last Friday off, guys. Oh, I try really, really hard to make sure that I post everything on time. But there was no way I could have even recorded a video last week, let alone do the editing. I have the best viewers in the world. Thank you so much. Oh, okay, and speaking of viewers, I'm going to be doing a collab in the near future. I've mentioned Venus Variation more than once on this channel, usually calling her out for being one of the nicest VTubers out there. She took it upon herself to help teach me how to start making clothes for my avatar here. A little thing that has since become a full-blown hobby, you may have noticed. She and I are going to get together on her show and talk fashion and maybe some current events. Venus has been a bit under the weather, or I'd have an actual date for the collab already, but it should be sometime in the next couple of days. Regardless, keep your eye on my Facebook, my Instagram, my Twitter. As always, I will post there as soon as I know what's happening. I do it here, but I don't have enough people to give me access to that function yet. Lastly, of course, I will be hanging out on Twitch again tonight. So, if it's Wednesday for you, come on down and explore the land of Liu with me, alright? Oh, I'd love to see more of you there. Now, last week in Hunter's Gambit, Kazuna Hall had been getting ready for an evening dinner with Richard, when Himiko forbade her from going on the trip at all, swearing to keep Kazuna Hall's majority from her, rendering her a child until such time as Himiko was willing to accept that she could be trusted to make her own decisions. Which, according to Himiko, would probably be on a cold day in hell. Kazuna had two choices then: give up on everything she'd been planning on, or leave home then and there. She chose the second, and left to go find Richard. Now, on with the show. Okay, just let me pull up the book here. Perfect! Richard finished putting the final touches on his room. He'd aired it out all day and cleaned up. He'd even asked the maid to polish the wood floor. It hadn't cost him much to get the tiny personal table removed from the room, and one of the tables from the Lucky Koi brought up. He'd ordered dinner for two, noodles and a sauce, with a salad on the side. The food still seemed out of place to him, full of salt and other preservatives. Growing up in Giza, they'd always had fresh fish, fruits and vegetables year-round. Here, the growing seasons were short, like their blastedly cold summers. It surprised him that they could grow anything at all. Regardless, everything was ready. Now, all he had to do was not sleep with Kazuna Hall. It was the sort of plan that was just crazy enough to work. Act professional and ready to take on anything, but don't let it get too personal. All he had to do was pretend he wasn't crazy about her. There was a quiet knock on the door, and he straightened his outfit again. He didn't own any courtier's outfits anymore, but he'd had his own clothes washed, and he'd polished every bit of metal on them. Cold iron didn't shine up well, but he'd done his best. As always, he was armed, his weapons hidden but accessible. 3 daggers, plus another 4 throwing knives. A smaller amount than he'd normally carry, but he had to be prepared. He opened the door, smiling. His jaw dropped. It was Kazuna Hall, but not the Kazuna Hall he'd been expecting. She usually wore robes tied with thick, heavy ribbons. Maya had said that they were a type of plain dress from C&Q. This dress was similar, but hung differently. The cloth was thinner and the belts tighter. They were a resplendent white that you couldn't get if you weren't noble, and the pink and blue threads running through to the design were lustrous on the stark background. They hung to her feet, stopping just above her ankles. She wasn't wearing boots of any sort, but a strange platformed sandal with toed socks. He found the socks strangely comforting, as if they were proof that he wasn't the only one who found the weather here abominable. She had just the slightest amount of kohl around her eyes, and some lipstick on her lips. Her hair was tied up with silk strands and silver sticks, decorated with tiny gems. Elegant, easily put up, and so satisfying to remove. Her expression was determined, which he found strangely disconcerting. Richard took a deep breath, trying to slow his pounding heart. He didn't know where all the air had gone. A small part of him begged him to give in, a roaring in his ears that he could ignore only with effort. It was too easy to fall to thoughts of pushing her on the bed and opening that dress. "Kazuna, I'm glad you're here. Sit, and I'll tell them to bring up dinner." He opened the door and moved into the hallway. It was cool after her heat. He put his forehead against the wall, and the chill wood welcomed him, instead of making him shiver. A large body moved up the stairs toward him. Lifting his head, Richard saw one of the innkeeper's sons, a thick-set man with dark hair and skin lighter than his own, walking towards him, carrying 2 steaming plates of pasta. "She has that effect on everyone. I would have died happy if she turned the smile she wore downstairs on me." Richard knew that feeling, and remembered the first time he'd felt it. He still remembered her, blonde hair and nails shining blood red. He clenched his fist. He would die before he went to another on his knees. But something the man had said had caught his attention. She was smiling downstairs? When the guy nodded, Richard took the plates and stepped back into his room. Maybe there was still a chance for both of them to enjoy the evening. Kazuna Hall was on his bed, playing with one of his other daggers. The cold metal touched her fingers, and he felt himself relax. "What is this metal?" she asked, toying with it. "It's all you use, but I've never seen it before." "It's cold iron," he said, putting the plates on the table. She tilted her head. "Like in the old myths about the fairies?" "Yes, I traveled through a few of the old forests on my way up here. My guide suggested that the more you carried, the less likely one was to take you." Not that the suggestion had helped his guide in the end. Fae were good at convincing people to stab themselves in the foot. A truly good servant would then apologize for bleeding on the floor and offer to clean it up. Kazuna Hall was naive. She laughed with the carefree abandon of someone who thought Fae were silly. "Does it work? We don't have those types of monsters around here. Only goblins in their ilk." "Oh, they are very real, my lady." "Truly? Huh. The only story I've ever heard told was of a Fae gentleman, and his fight to keep his true love, a mortal girl, with him." If the Fae had cared for the girl in the story, it was clearly only as a toy. Richard shivered and touched one of the body-warmed hilts at his waist. It was comforting, in the way that only a tool of violence could be. Kazuna sat up straighter. "Wait, do you mean to say you've seen one? Not just superstitions you've heard?" He pulled his hand away from the knife with difficulty. "Enough to make me believe that any love they felt was nothing more than a facsimile of an emotion." He hazily remembered terrified eyes in a dark forest, a kiss, and then the man gasping, claws in his belly. Kazuna was at his side, but he hadn't heard her move. Not a good sign. He breathed deeply. He was in Hidan, not in one of the Carnegian forests. A bad experience? I lost a friend. It wasn't the whole story, or even the right story, but it would do for the nonce. He pushed her away and moved to the table. Picking up his fork, he viciously stabbed his dinner. Nothing this evening was going like he planned. He sat and took a deep breath. The pasta smelled rich and heavy from the creamy white sauce. The scent of the freshly baked bread with it was heaven. It was as far away from dark, cool forests as one could get. The salad was odd, full of cauliflower, carrots, celery, and radishes. He shoveled the forkful of pasta into his mouth and chewed. Kazuna sat down across from him and picked up her own fork. I spoke with Deckard. He was amenable. And your sister? He asked. Kazuna put down her fork and looked out the window. Her lower lip trembled. She said that if I left with you, she'd call it kidnapping to the sheriff. How legal is that? He asked, putting down his fork. He hadn't thought that anything legal could be done against her, but perhaps he'd simply been blessed growing up in Giza. That idea scared him more than a little. Kazuna had been about to take a bite of her pasta, but she put her fork down, sighing. Honestly, I'm not sure. She's the family matriarch now, and my legal guardian. If I leave without her giving me my autonomy, it could be in trouble. How old are you? He said, thinking quickly. He'd known that she hadn't attained her majority yet, but he hadn't considered how that would affect her. He'd been on his own since his mother had died when he'd been 9. Nobody cared how old you were on the street. They cared how big you were, and whether or not you could defend your turf. I'll be 21 tomorrow. 21? Not 19? Nearly 4 years older than him. How in the hell did you get anything done if you had to wait until you were 21? But if you've passed your majority, it's non-negotiable? But I think I found a way around it. At least for any trouble for you. If I leave town without seeing my sister, I can argue that I knew it was an empty threat, that I knew she'd never really do it. Then, if she does, all the trouble will fall on me, and not you. That was a very fine edge to skirt. Will your sheriff listen to that argument? He might. The mayor, though, likes my sister. If she's willing to go to him, he might just change the law or just make her continued guardianship of me legal. I have to be willing to ostracize myself completely if I want to leave after that. But that would be my choice and not your trouble. Dangerous. Was it too dangerous to still go with her? Now was the time to back out if he was going to. We just need to pick up our other items from Talbert. Unfortunately, even with Deckard backing off, he isn't willing to discuss it. So, how would you feel about me involving a friend and having us leave tomorrow? Or the day after, at the latest? Kazuna finally ate the bit of pasta on her fork. He wasn't adverse to the idea of leaving town sooner rather than later. It might even be prudent, depending on what he found out tonight at his meeting. A friend? Won't Talbert know that he's buying the items for you? Jack owns a boat, she said. He could claim it was supplies for that. I'd buy them directly from him, but unless he happens to be arranging a trip already, he probably won't have any on hand. Who is this guy? He's a member of Eden's other ruling family, the Curlows. They control the docks, and Jack personally works with the church to provide tours of the holy site. He offered me a job once, but I was still hoping to take over the family business at the time. Well, even if he offered again, I don't know if I could accept working under him. Richard sat back, and she finally ate another bite of her pasta on her fork. She stabbed at a bit of the salad next. We could use his aid. Would he be willing to help for free? He's a give-and-take kind of guy, Kazuna said before wincing. Let me try that again. He's a good guy, but he'll insist on some form of payment. If he requires payment for more than the items, it will come out of your cut, and not mine, Richard said. There's a large chance that we won't find the treasure. I won't indebt myself to your noble friend over this. Honestly, if they found the treasure and the man was being reasonable, Richard would be more than willing to pay half. He wouldn't do it without knowing the specifics first, though. Kazuna Hall swallowed a bite of bread and followed up with a generous sip of wine. Of course, she said. At this point, I don't care what money I make. I am going to prove to Himiko that I'm not her little sister anymore. That I can do whatever I damn well please. She paused, looking at him. You're not eating? He'd been watching her eat. Delicate but strong, her movements called attention to the dress, and the skin just underneath it. Whenever she leaned over her plate, her other hand moved her dress away from her wrist. It was erotic, and yet there wasn't any reason that tiny bit of skin showing should be. He swallowed without really tasting his food. I was just trying to figure out what this would change. Will you need me to go with you to talk to your friend? She shook her head. No, he knows me. It will be easier to convince him alone. And how did things go with Deckard? Surprisingly, she said, a small smile crossing her lips. That didn't explain anything, and she knew it. Her instincts had taught her to off-balance people, and then take an inch wherever she could. No one would argue her the inch, after all. By the time you realized that inches became feet or miles eventually, it was too late. He set his chin. He'd dealt with Asani, the bitch that got him on the run in the first place. He hadn't even noticed that one's machinations until she was at his doorstep, metaphorically speaking. If nothing else, he knew how to handle her type now, even if Kazuna Hall wasn't as destructive as Asani had been. Each woman was crafted just a bit differently. It was that unending newness that he enjoyed the most. I mean, how are things between you now? He hadn't been sure how Deckard would react to her demands. He'd thought that her ex may still have been carrying a torch for her, regardless of the traveler girl that he was currently keeping in his bed. Well enough. He was annoyed, and he'll be more annoyed if I have to ask him for help again. Still, he listened earlier. Perhaps miracles do happen. Then, is there anything else you need from me? Actually, I do. I don't suppose you know of any places to stay, do you? He nearly laughed. She wasn't trying to seduce him. She was trying to drive him mad. If you're sleeping here, then you'll be in my bed. His voice was thicker than he'd intended. She flushed, glancing towards the bed. She turned back to him so quickly she may have injured her neck. She gave a small bow. No. I'll figure out something else. His gut roiled, but he just shrugged. Did Himiko kick you out? No. I left. My bag was mostly packed anyway, but I couldn't stay there anymore, Richard. I want something more. Some place that isn't hers. Richard understood. It was stupid, but sometimes you needed to be stupid. Pride was a fickle beast. I couldn't support her in this, though. If she stayed here, the sheriff would be here by morning. He might end up seeing the man anyways. He also had his meeting later tonight to go to. Too many good reasons not to keep her here. I'll see if I can find someplace else to stay. He nodded and felt a tug in his belly. He couldn't guarantee her safety in the common room downstairs with the ship that had just arrived, dropping sailors hoping for a warm berth into the inn, and he'd seen that the other 2 rooms like this had been taken as well. He didn't know of this Jack fellow at all, but he did know one person in town who would do everything he could to keep her safe, while asking for nothing more from her. You should go see Deckard. He has that extra healing room after all. Richard swore that one day he would see exactly how far down that blush went. Oh, as always, I love Richard chapters. Just let me put down the book here. Perfect. Oh, Richard's mind is always moving. Oh, and even when he's distracted by wild lust running through him, he's always got some part of himself that's nothing but his own interests in mind. Oh, for some, that might make him a little more unlikable of a character, but as you get to know Richard throughout the story, he proves time and again that he isn't willing to leave his friends in a bind. He may think about it, a dark little demon on his shoulder, but he doesn't actually do it. That's Richard all over, actually. A dark little demon on his shoulder and the angel nowhere to be seen. It makes him a bit more corrupt than your average hero, but he still isn't an anti-hero or even a grimdark hero. He'd say he's no hero at all. And to a point, that's true. In our lives, our decisions and choices are often not as simple or as clean as those that a normal hero faces. Richard lives in the space that most of us live in. Life isn't just a black and white canvas. There are shades of gray and hundreds of other colors and shades besides. Richard accepts the truth and works with the knowledge that everything has a price. Every action has a reaction. And sometimes there is no good ending. He's the sort of hero that I don't see enough of in books, and I think that's partially why I like him so much. Deckard is a white hat, capital H hero, and the world needs those. But it also needs heroes like Richard's as well. And I think that's where I'm going to be ending it today. As I mentioned before, if you're watching this on Wednesday, I will be on Twitch later tonight, so come and join me. Otherwise, I'll be back again on Friday with my list of other must-reads in the epic/medieval fantasy category. Okay, I will see you then. Bye!